Ken is going to introduce our mainline speaker. Here he comes.
Good morning from me. Anyway, I think we were asked last time to wave to the Zoom folk that we have out there somewhere. So wave to our Zoom. There you are. Our Zoom colleagues are very happy at that. Anyway, I want to plug 2 or 3 things. One is our trip on the 2nd of December. It's to Coleman's Garden Centre and Stormont. And I note that it's starting to fill up fast. And that's the 2nd of December. And I note that on that day, there is a Counterpoint Christmas concert. And it is in St. Patrick's Church in Coleraine, and it's at 7:30. So I promise you that we will be back from Stormont in good time to go to Peter Wilson's concert in St. Patrick's Church. And Peter's here. I think I saw him somewhere today. Yeah, front row. So any queries or what? I noticed that Handel's Messiah, there will be excerpts from that. On that, so hopefully that. So what a perfect day out. You can go get on the bus 9 o'clock B&Q, get the Coleman Centre, tea, coffee, up to Stormont, Long Gallery, and then back. Think of the units that you'll be saving on electricity going out for the day, and you'll get a little bit of retail stuff at Coleman's. You'll get a little bit of fine dining at Stormont, maybe a little bit of politics. You don't know what excitement will be on in Stormont by the 2nd of December. And then back for a little bit of culture in the evening. You couldn't beat it. So anyway, that's the 2nd of December. The other thing is our Christmas lunch is moving ahead, and it is on the 8th of December at Royal Court. So again, bookings are out, and it is either you can do all that and sum up, or you can download the forms and send checks off to me, that person. So that's that. There's a couple other things that went out on the newsletter, and they would be the Seabound Causeway Coast Maritime Heritage Group, and that's the film in the film theatre, the Playhouse in Portrush, and that's Saturday the 12th. Then there's a Sunday service, and it's Hymns We Love, Service of Praise, and it's with the Coleraine Community Choir, First Coleraine Presbyterian Church, and that's on the 13th. And the other one that I got delivered yesterday was the Christmas. Many of you would have been at the Cantimus concert in St. Patrick's. Well, this is now the Christmas one. Date for your diary: Friday the 16th of December. It's in Star of the Sea in Port Stewart, and it's 7:30 on the 16th of December. Another good evening. And then usually, I'm not sure whether this is happening, but you then adjourn up to the halls and you get some Tesco mince pies and tea and coffee, I believe. So anyway, that's it. That's all those things covered. We have today a special guest, Danny Kinnican, who is now the Northern Ireland Veterans Commissioner. And he's going to talk about a strong voice for veterans in Northern Ireland. But if you go back in history, you go back to the Kinnicans, Sir Robin Kinnican, Coralie Kinnican, his mother, Coralie de Burgh Kinnican of de Burgh fame, and Danny and Chris de Burgh, cousin of Chris. But he always said he only ever met him once and he wasn't that impressed. So, is that right? So, yeah, many of you will remember visiting afternoon tea or having afternoon tea in the castle. And that was a wonderful day. So popular in actual fact that we had to do 2 trips to Danny's home at Castle Upton. And he's been through many different aspects, MP, MLA, and so on and so forth. But he says he's comfortable with his life at the minute, and he's got time out, and that's a wonderful thing to have. So it's a great pleasure for us to have Danny with us today, and he's going to address us. There'll be an opportunity after all to ask some questions, and he's more than happy to answer those. So over to Danny. Thank you.
Anyway, while I'm being linked up, thank you very much again. Thanks, Barbara. Thank all of you. Last time I did a talk like this, it was 10 people in the room and a nice cozy circle of it, when it wasn't Alcoholics Anonymous, but nearly. So I was preparing in the same way. What I was trying to do, rather than talk, was have some photographs that would link everything together. I count myself as phenomenally lucky with the life that I've been dealt, and I've ended up as Veterans Commissioner, but I was also in my notes asked to talk a little bit about the history of the family, Christie's, a little bit about politics. So you've got a real mix in here. The trouble is, last night when I was trying to find photographs, I'm not good at technology. I got the photographs onto my iPad, but in the wrong order. And we've just been trying to get them into some order. What I thought I would do, if I may, is just talk initially without the photographs to give you the sort of picture of all the things I've been involved in, I hope with fun stories, and then tell you a little bit about my veterans work and what I'm doing at the moment. And I'm just keeping that time so I don't talk for too long. But if you think, I mean, you grow up not knowing who you are, just thrown into the world. I was phenomenally lucky. We started off up in Mollusk in a house, and this was 1963. My biggest memories, and I haven't photographed it, is the snows, the heavy snows, but the snows were all bigger than me. And Dad digging his way out down onto the main road, and he was on the board of English bakeries to make sure bread got through to those in Mollusk. And you just grew up with it. Then when I was 5, Mum and Dad bought the castle, and those of you, I mean, how many of you were on those visits? Have been? Well, thank you. So some of you then won't know what I'm talking about, but to be suddenly stuck into what was a grey, damp castle, and my sister and I arrived, and Mum and Dad went, "This is your home," and I looked at him and, "Is it haunted?" So you sort of grew up that, and then it just became home, and everything else falls in place with Mum and Dad heavily involved in politics and business, in the military. And so I grew up with all this sort of influence, not really knowing where I'm going. So very much Lyle and Kinahan was the family drinks business, and Dad sold that to Charrington. That's how he then managed to afford to buy this little castle in Temple Patrick. He came home one night to Mum. I said, "You know that castle I told you I'd fallen in love with? I've bought it." Mum had no say. Suddenly it was hers to do up. And, Dad threw everything. In those days, you didn't have the motorway. You went into Belfast over the hill, and the airport was at Nuts Corner. So Temple Patrick was the middle of nowhere instead of sort of a quay passing through town as today. Then Mum would have brought me up, and I have a few slides like this one. This is a de Burgh wedding in the First World War. So if you wonder how I end up as Veterans Commissioner, look at how many of them in that wedding are in uniform. I think the only ones that aren't in uniform are the ones that are in the church, who are in a different uniform. So brought up, deeply embedded in sort of military history and background. And so those are de Burghs. The Kinahans would have been less military, but very much merchants. And grandfather grew up in the First World War. He was the 7th child of 13. All the others died of different reasons. He wasn't allowed to go and fight in the First World War, and always felt that was wrong. But he was kept behind to run the business and everything else. But believe it or not, their father was one of 16. And yet there's only 2 angles of the family still left. So that's 16 to 13, and we still end up just with 2. And then Dad was in politics. He was mayor of Belfast, 58-60, and so very much politics throughout my life. For schooling, I never knew quite why, and I don't have photographs of this. I was packed off to a Scottish prep school, age 7. If you imagine doing that to your children now, you didn't question it, that's what I did, but I got sent off there, and I always joke about this. Mum was a Second World War mum, if I can call her that. I got sent off with my sister's pajamas, which were pink, and buttoned that way, and didn't have a hole where you wanted a hole. I had a teddy, and then to make it worse, we had to wear a kilt on a Sunday, and Mum put me in a saffron kilt, which I'd be really proud of now. And she said, no, you just tell those Scots that this is a proper kilt, and you lot put the colours in it, we had it plain. So I did. So I wasn't very popular. But over the time being sent to a Scottish prep school, it was tough. It was sort of cold showers, PT out in the morning, whatever the weather, whether it was sleet, snow, and it was really solid Victorian education of learning your dates, your numbers, your maths, and I hated it. I was bullied is the wrong term. It was tough, and I fought my corner. And I thought that set me up for everything else in life. I'm a shy person. I don't like standing up in front of no one. I'm used to just having to stand and have a go at things. Took me away, then sent me to an English public school to Stowe, which is the Duke of Buckingham's house. Fabulous, great big place. Again, freezing cold, no heating. So you'll see that theme going through all my life. And when I got there, I found I was a year ahead of my mates because of the good Scottish education. So they made the mistake of putting me in the scholars form. And I found my reports the other day, and I thought, I'll show my reports to my children. Then I read them. No, I won't. And it was always someone struggling, and they kept me in the scholar form. I just kept my own, and I was lucky then to only do 4 years at Stowe. But the obvious thing to do was join the army. So I looked at the army, but based it in Aldergrove were the Blues and Royals, and their mums and dads would bring my parents and go, little Johnny's serving there for the next 6 months, will you look after them? And this happened with every regiment. And as I grew up, and you'll see some photographs that sort of link into this later, patrols in those days would come in the front gate, stop off, have a cup of tea, carry off on their patrol, and then come back and get the pistol they'd left behind later. And you just grew up with all these regiments going through. So I was lucky enough to join the Blues and Royals. And you think how extraordinary of all the regiments, but there were no Irish regiments in those days serving here, so I never met them. And all my mates and colleagues here, the same sort of background, we all joined different regiments. And so that's how you sort of get my link into the army. But Mum wasn't a pushover. Mum believed in making you do things all the time, and if you took you out riding on horses, we were all brought up with animals. You were told about every bird, every bit of history, every leaf that you passed, and like a good son, I wasn't listening. And in time, some of it sank in, but you had this sort of drive from somebody who never let you rest. And I think of Grandpa, and you'll see photographs of him, who there's no such word as can't. And that was their non's favourite word, and I ended up saying it to my own children, and then thinking, oh dear. But you know, these very strong lines, never to lie, you know, always to try and help people and get involved. And yet at the same time, when I joined the army, the commanding officer said, right, it's work hard, play hard. I expect you to go into things full speed. And so in a way, that's driven me through everything I've done. Left the army, came home. That was the first time I started doing something that I hadn't a clue. I wrote to big companies because I wanted to get home, and ended up working for Short Brothers. And the person in charge of Shorts was the deputy managing director, said I won't get an army officer with a business studies degree. And I'd been to Edinburgh University on the army. And so he said, you go around the whole of Shorts in every little nook and cranny, and then write me a report. It was huge, 5,500 people there in those days. And I wrote him a report basically saying no one knows what the next door building's doing. So I ended up putting in a briefing system in place and trying to get them all to learn. But it was everything I had learnt about what was wrong with British industry. I'm probably being unfair, lots of people working really hard. But to give you one sort of side story, while I was there, I had left the army, but the North Irish Horse needed a squadron leader, so I went back into what were known as the territorials then. And that year we were to go on a big exercise in Germany, and all our vehicles were to be helicopter borne, but only if you could get the titanium shackles from the Ministry of Defence. Otherwise, we'd train for it, but it wouldn't actually be lifted off the ground. So I said to my staff that, how are we going to do this? One of them said, it's okay, we'll make them at shorts during the night. So every vehicle had its shackles made. I didn't ask twice, but anyway, all our shackles were made, and then they cancelled the exercise. So 3 years in Shaw Brothers, learned a great deal there, and then Christie's, the London auction house, they thought I knew all the right people here who had all the right things. So they thought if we employ him, they'll sell through Danny, which there's a certain bit of truth to. But I then arrived on this Christie's fine art course, aged 30. If you think that's a stage in life where I now know what I want to know, I know I want to learn, so really lovely. So to learn about fine art and the history of fine art, fantastic. But even better, the first day you walked into the room, 60 students, of whom 50 are pretty young girls, all well-heeled and well-off, plus 5 ambassadors' wives. So I remember thinking, and I've got a girlfriend somewhere else. Anyway, but it was lovely. It was just a real eye-opener to the art world. And my job from then on was come home and look after all the clients that were already Christie's, find new clients, and basically if anyone had anything they wanted valued, value it. And it was a wonderful life. But you learned this fine art course. We learned all about Picasso and all the top artists and Chippendale and all the top furnitures. And you come home and the first painting through the door is a McKelvey. And you're meant to know. Anyway, so literally it was learned from the books. It was take photographs, it was send it. And that first painting, the lady came in and said that I should never have bought this. It cost me 10 bob. During the war, she said, I was walking down, went past Rodman's, and there it was in the window, and I thought, I want that. So I bought it, and I went home, having not bought the groceries she'd been sent for, and got given a really hard time anyway. Only person left in her family. And she said, what's it worth? And meanwhile, I was going through every book I could, looking for similar pictures, similar size. And I said, I honestly think it's worth between 20 and 25,000. And she had to sit down. It made 26. So it was lovely. It was a nice start, but a lot of things go wrong. So if you think, I then had 18 years working for Christie's. It started off 2 days a week doing Northern Ireland, then 3, then the whole of Ireland. So literally you drove everywhere and you had this extraordinary life. You had the clients that you looked after forever and a day. You had the nice ones and the impolite ones. But you just had weird stories and things happening to you. And to give you one later in life, I thought I could do 4 calls I had in Ireland in one day. So it was Enniskillen, one in Sligo, one in Galway, and one just above Mallow. And I thought, do pretty good. But it was only a painting in the first 2. You get to Enniskillen and the whole family were there and they'd all brought everything they wanted valued. So that one painting became a mini roadshow. But you did, and I rang Mrs. Reed, who was the last call, and said, I'm sorry, I'm going to be an hour late. Then got to Sligo, same again, but much bigger family, plus friends. And so another little road show. So I was now running 2.5 hours late, so I rang Mrs. Reed. Then got to Galway, 2 vases, and that's all it was. But I got to Mallow, and wonderfully Irish directions. It was into Mallow, first right, then you'll get to 3 crossroads, go straight on each one, and then the castle is on the right. None of them were crossroads, they were all Y junctions, and which was straight. Anyway, I got first time round, I turned in first right, and this huge thatched house, not a castle, so I went back to the beginning. So Annie was 4.5 hours late, you're now sweaty, you're bothered, it's dark, and I get to the front door, ring the doorbell, and this enormous man rolls out, and I go, you must be Mr. And it's Oliver Reed. And he went, you must need a drink. So I got literally a half pint of whiskey, And he sat me down and he had some fairly rough, quite Republican friends there, and he was discussing it through, and he goes, what do you specialize in? And I said, well, I was sort of a generalist. I had to do everything, so I'm not good. And he went, what did you do before that? No, I was in the Household Cavalry. And he minced off across the room, going, oh, rolled up a sleeve. There's my army number. I was Paras. Anyway, another half pint of whiskey. Valued his bits of furniture and others. And then he went, well, if you're in the Blues and Royals, you know how to use a sword. And he went off and got his swords from the Three Musketeers and came back and, come on, let's go outside. I'm sorry, I was a coward. I went, sorry, my wife's just rung, I've got to go. And I weaved my way down the road to the nearest pub and stayed the night there. Sadly, he was dead 6 months later, I think, while filming the Gladiator. So that's the sort of top end, and then weird things that happened with another, I'm not going to give you too many, but just it's a fun story. I'm clearing a house just south of Dungannon, and the last two items are two white statues of naked women, sort of like this nice Victorian ones, get one wedged into the back and one into the left-hand seat beside me. So, and my next call's across the border. So I cross the border, and the troubles are still on, do some valuations outside, and for the day I zigzag backwards and forwards because all my calls are between the sort of Fermanagh and Londonderry crossing the border, and the last call is back onto our side of the border, and I cross over, and this patrol leaps out of the bushes. Gotcha! And I have this English voice, like I was probably wearing a guard's tie, and oh, we've had these reports all day long of this car driving two dead bodies. Anyway, the more silly things. Then Christie's laid me off after 18 years. I set up an art gallery. I set up valuation system. I'm quite happy. And running Castle Upton and the farm and trying to work through, when I arrived home, the farm was losing 25 grand a year. Mum and Dad went, great to have you home, we're moving, and built in the yard and gave me the castle, which I then filled with friends, like a London flat. Great fun, but not good for the castle, as we were sort of young men living it up. And I've forgotten where I was going on this one. Doing that at the same time as whatever I'm doing. So I'm now back at home, prop at home, and then the phone rings, and it's Jim Wilson, the MLA, going, Danny, and we need a councillor for Temple Patrick. Will you do it? For me? Politics? Quietly one end going, yeah. The other end going, do it. So I went and asked Anna, my wonderful wife. She said no. So I went back and said no to Jim. He then rang half an hour later going, are you sure? It's only an hour a week. A day a week, yeah. Anyway, so I asked Anna again, no. And then David Trimble rang later that night going, look, really, we need you, will you? I thought, God, if David Trimble rings, that's a real honour. Back to Anna, who still said no. So I said, well, actually, I think I'm going to do it. And bless her, she's supported me ever since. So that's how I ended up in politics. I'm in my late 40s, and it's rather nice to go into politics, having done a whole mass of other things. Although it's dangerous, it means you think you know about some things, which you probably didn't. I was told, doing one day a week, and I got there, and this really shocked me. A big election, you work really hard for the council. I got 903 votes. I was really upset. I wanted thousands. The US councils aren't like that, but I only needed 897 to get in. So I'm afraid that's how you ended up with me in politics. And once you're in, it's really hard to ever step away, because those that support you keep pushing you and keep running. So you do. It's a lovely track that you're in to just keep going. And I enjoyed most moments. It's pretty hard, and you can ask me all sorts of questions later. But just odd things. I go in at a time when this party's going down. And so I was always fighting on a sort of losing side, if I could put it that way, but it's still worth doing. But a few years later, I stood for Stormont, didn't get in. I got again a vote I thought wasn't very good, but everyone was impressed. I then got put into Stormont when David Burnside stood down. And your maiden speech, that is probably the most frightening thing you do in politics. The hardest is when you stand up in front of your party and you have to say what you believe in, but in a way that they then choose you. But when you get to Stormont, you've got to do your maiden speech. And, even in my late 40s, and big Ian Paisley came in about 5 minutes before I was due to have to go to his seat and groaned it round and turned it so it's facing me and then sat looking at me. And I remember thinking, you horror. But anyway, did my speech, and then the odd thing afterwards, it was one of the Shinners, the guy who put the loaf of bread in his head, and I've forgotten his name, who actually came right afterwards and said, that's a really good start, well done. And you think, people aren't as bad as you think, and there's a strange world that runs through it. I do remember some people really friendly, and of course it was always the Shinners. They were always the ones that knew a Christian name. They were all Christian names. Our own side were the ones who were harder to work with. I never got hello from Peter Robinson until I actually went up to him and stuck my hand out and said hello. Just, you realised all these little bits. But what was oddest for me, I'd served in Belfast with the Black Watch in '83, and I was a company, this isn't very important, intelligence officer. So my job was to teach the soldiers who to look for. And I go into a chamber where half my photograph montage are sitting on the other side of the chamber, and they know my past and I know their past. And actually, in a way, I got on perfectly well with them. But you got into that world of fighting through Stormont, doing what your party wants you to do, trying to do what you personally want to do, and you're sort of trapped into the big side of it, but doing your best. But the negative, and you all know it from Stormont, is we spend our life stopping anyone else doing anything. We very rarely achieve. And to then get to Westminster, which I count myself as very lucky. If you think of the number of politicians trying to win in a seat, and some of them are in seats that they'll never win because their side don't have a majority. So to be able to stand in your home, in your area, for the party you believe in and the others, and have a chance of winning, is incredibly lucky. So that sort of runs all the way through. I get to Westminster, this is back to 2015, and you get there for 5 years. Brilliant, until Theresa May called an election after 2, and that was that. But the odd memories there would be walking across that bridge that first morning. Now you're told, it's like going to school. You've got in, you then get your starting day, right, you need to come over this week. The first week, all these stands will be there to tell you about your pension, your travel, and all the things. So I thought there's no point going over Monday or Tuesday. The others will be doing it. So I walk over that bridge to the House of Commons thinking, wow, and equally thinking, I'm 58. Why am I putting myself all through this? And you get to this lovely door, and a man in full tailcoats goes, Mr. Kinahan. And I go, good Lord, how on earth do you know who I am? You're lost. Everyone else had been over Monday and Tuesday. So you go into this hall where the pensions people are there for you and travelled for you. Now, they were all lovely, but it just showed you this. You're into this world, you're being looked after a different way. It was a big club, but you weren't under the awful pressure that you were here all the time of someone going to stab you in the back, or your local radio who's wanting you on. You are suddenly slightly out of sight, and that is a problem of its own. And into a world, and we were two, so it was Tom Elliott and I sharing an office. Tom would be a little bit more Labour and I'd be a little bit more Conservative. And when it came to voting, the difference in the chamber was 2. So everyone was friendly to you. So you could play it for all it wants. So, that's really how I ended up in politics. And there's plenty more. I mean, my concentration at Stormont was mainly on education, which I loved. I was deputy chair to Mervyn Story, and that really allowed you to get into it. But to give you one angle of how it was really odd, new education authority, 12 people on it, and couldn't we agree on who the 12 were? So I went around every little office I could of all the other parties until we got agreement to make sure that we had the integrated in, because they weren't there at the beginning, to make sure we had the right balance between controlled schools and Catholic schools and everything else. Eventually got there by literally me going around all the doors. And when I got back, my party went, why did you do that? Because now they'll all stand up and say they did it, which they all did. But we got an education authority that had representation from everyone. So it was possible there if you just worked hard and got round everyone to get things to work. Westminster, completely different. You're there with a party in charge, and it is going to do whatever it's doing. So all you're going to do is affect it slightly to tweak it for Northern Ireland. So I made my task, go to everything I could, make sure they know who Northern Ireland is and that we're part of the place and that we're good guys, that we can get on with them. We're there to help. At the same time, you help us and work it the other way. And you can have extraordinary moments. So going down one corridor, door opened. Oh, Danny, we need an 8th person for the all-party group on forestry. Would you come in just so that we have a quorum? So I pile in, sit down, I end up as secretary. Because when they asked me, they said, what do you know about forestry? And I went, not much, but we've got ash dieback, whatever they can't remember now, the disease, had all these diseases, and we've got this problem now, and we're doing this, that, and the other. And they all went, you know more than the rest of us. And before you realized it, if you go in there, no one there knows much about anything except their own fields. And if you look around, that's why 600 plus is good, because you've got in there, you've normally got people that know their subject. And when you get to the Lords, it obviously gets much, much higher. And that's what really impressed me. There were always people that knew what they were talking about. There's an awful lot that didn't. But it worked and it did things. So your one speech, your one question was the one way of influencing it. And I remember just all sorts of different times. You're sitting here, Michael Gove was Justice Minister, asking him a question about McGabbery, knowing that it's not his responsibility, but it allowed you to do it. And he went, I'll see what I can do. Remembering they needed 2 votes. And next day, Theresa Villas, who was the Secretary of State, called me in and I gave her the problems in McGabbery, and it resolved a week later. I thought, God, I wish Stormont was like that. But you know, that was what was so fantastic of being there, and that's what you've got sitting in front of you. Now, my own life, for those that have all been to the castle, and I'll click through some slides in a minute and apologise for out of order. We've gone home, place that was losing for 25,000. I battled away to get a hotel and a golf course on the land, which is the Hilton. That I got in place to pay us, but Mum owned the land and Mum was now in a care home in England, so she had to get the lion's share of it. So having got it in place, and I don't begrudge that in any way, it was absolutely right. But it meant it still didn't get money, so the castle slowly eating into it. I mean, lovely place to have. Children are now all long gone, all in London. And I just thought, this is daft. So sold the castle 3 years ago, but only with 20 acres. So basically, a lovely guy called Terry Hughes bought it. Took 3 years to sell. It's that hard to get rid of a castle, if you think. Most people want a bit of heating and all the other things to go with it, and it's hard. And he's going to do it up he's going to put the battlements back on. It had the top floor had been taken off a long time ago. He was going to put the main rooms back on each of the big towers, put the battlements back on, and then the kitchens that had a long time ago been burned down before we were there. He's going to rebuild them. But historic buildings won't let him rebuild them in modern style. So he's going to do it all in glass, so you can still see all the stonework. And it took him 3 years to get planning permission, so he hasn't moved in yet. But it's lovely. He's my neighbour. I've moved 800 yards. And we had this wall garden. And then the wall garden, it had had the UPF there in the First World War and was all nissen huts. Then it was overgrown when we bought the place. Battery hens, I remember as a little boy being slightly horrified by them, but also intrigued. And then we did pick your own strawberries for a while. We're opposite Coleman's, so the other side, pick your own strawberries did very well for the guy doing it. For me, then it got a disease and it went back to being a field. And Connolly McCausland from Drina rented it for doing tree surgery. It ended up with piles of bits of wood. But we've now got this huge house and I've got to click on it. Lovely home. Family can all come home. And then the golf course, Hilton wants to sell the lease to somebody else. And my lawyers were going, no, they're too big a risk. So huge legal battle. Anyway, then she got bought out. So I basically have got 40 acres back from that and the house. And I'm now Veterans Commissioner. And for me, veterans, sort of ingrained in me, and particularly looking after soldiers. We think we have about 150,000 veterans in Northern Ireland, and that's those that served, male or female, RAF, Navy, Army. But I've no database. We know there were over 60,000 UDR. We know there are lots of people like me who joined different regiments or those who've come back. And we know that Northern Ireland always had sort of 6-7% of those serving, even 20% at one time. So huge numbers. And my job is to be their voice, is to make sure the support systems work as best they can. And then it's to try and put some structure in place that lasts into the future, knowing that most of our veterans, and I have to be careful on this one, are in the twilight of their lives. When I briefed the old party group on veterans at Westminster, it was nice to be on the other side this time. I used that term, twilight of their lives, so I apologize to those, but Bob Stewart stood up and went, if you think I'm in the twilight of my life, you can forget it. Come and have a pint afterwards. So that shows you the sort of friendships you make there. But trying to shake the tree is really what my job is. And if I've gone to probably about 450 meetings in the 2 years. I've got 1 year left. I'm part-time. I don't report to anyone. I have to be non-political, which is perfect because I want to try and make veterans non-political because they are from all walks of society. I go on to these meetings and I find most veterans don't know what's out there. They might know a British Legion and SAFA or the local regimental association, but mainly because most people are happy, they've gone on with their lives, and when things go wrong, that's when you need it. And then you've switched off. At the same time, it doesn't help to hear that no one's really looked after them. You know, so many have gone back, they're still looking under their cars, they still won't talk, this is particularly west of the province, they still won't go to a doctor that they don't trust. You know, there's a whole lot of issues that come with it. So I've got no database. I find veterans don't know what's there, but really hiding behind it all, and I'm sure all of you are in the same boat. At a certain age in life, bits start, those old pains are now worse. They're acute pain. I find wherever I'm going, a mass of veterans quietly suffering, but not telling anyone. So one of my big battles is if this government, and it says it wants to be the, make sure the United Kingdom is the best place to be a veteran by 2028. So that was when they were planning on two terms with Boris flying. Anyway, that's still their drive. So I'm going, right, if you really mean that, I want a lump sum of money so I can move my veterans who are in pain to King Edward's Hospital, to others. Take the pressure off the health service here, but we should be doing it for all of you anyway. But that's one of my drives. We put out a questionnaire on Monday, which I'm doing through British Legion's UDR, through any hub I can find. Because whenever I get to a politician, an English politician like Johnny Mercer, and I'm saying, I need this lump sum, he's going, right, prove it, I need numbers. With no database, I have no numbers. I just know when I went to Rathfryland to a breakfast out of 40 people in the room, 8 were in severe pain, and those are the ones that are there. I know from each group, when I go to someone in Dungannon, and I know many of you will be on the same page, 2 years to get assessment, 8 years to get his knee done, is what he'd been told. So that questionnaire is designed for me to go, right, here are 349 in pain at the moment, needing help. We need to do something fast. Went live on Monday at 170 replies already, which is good. But I've got to shake the health system here just as much as I've got to shake it to see if we can get it working for you all. Then on mental health, you have quite a high amount of mental health problems coming in with the military because of what was done during the Troubles. But actually my worst cases are Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Balkans. One guy spent 3 days loading bodies onto trailers, still lives with him. Then Musakala, if ever you've heard of it, Royal Irish had a particularly nasty battle for 53 days, I think it was, under fire. One of them, when I was at Westminster, I brought the Armed Forces Minister over, and he met 15 people with mental health difficulties that day. One of them had run home from the middle of a gun battle in Causeway to tell his parents that he had 3 bullets left and he was keeping the last one for himself. And anyway, he took his life the first day I was in this new role. And so one of my battles is to try and make sure we got mental health support there. But the younger soldiers from Bolton's Afghan and Iraq are not the same. They're quite different. A lot of them get around their problems. They want to hike around mountains. They want to pump iron. They want different. They don't, in the older days, they're not going up to have a pint to see their mates. So they're quite different. And just to make it more difficult here, in my role, Northern Ireland won't recognise veterans as a section. You know, they're the same as all of you. So if you go to any department at Stormont, then it can't do anything different for veterans. So you've got to get them assessed so that they're higher up the list because of their need. And then, of course, some parties won't recognise them and others more than recognise them. So you've got this game of politics going on. You have a covenant in place on the mainland promising to look after soldiers better in health, education, various things. It is yet to be interpreted as to how that bill will happen here in Stormont, if we had a Stormont. So it's not only, you need Stormont before they'll sit down and look at how they interpret it. So you've got that running through the whole system here, and yet you've got veterans here who are in the same regiment as someone on the mainland, seeing him getting X, Y, and Z, and he's not getting it here. However, that's what he sees and is his perception. There are really good groups here, whether it's SAFA, British Legion, the regimental associations, the local groups like Ashes to Gold and others. There's fantastic things here we're working with. It's just disjointed. So that goes to my other end of the task, which is sort of trying to pull it all together. So we have tried again. This will be one of my battles. I mentioned it beforehand. That's just an example of all the different groups that are there to help veterans, but they don't know. Trying to get this sent to people. They go, no, we'll do it through technology. Most of the senior veterans are rather like me, they're not good at technology. So I'm trying to get this sent, and then it's 90p a letter. And then people don't want something saying Corporal so-and-so or so-and-so and looking too military. So we've yet to get there. I've got these going around everywhere because we've got a very good veterans support office. And then I have a smaller version here, if any of you would take it with you, if you know veterans, which shows you the different groups and what they do. But I'm lucky. I'm seeing a really great bunch of people all the time. But you do tend to see the ones that have difficulties. And somewhere at the other end, I've got to find a way to lift, because there are great skills you learn in the military, not just the sort of leadership, but the discipline and the hard work and always wanting to make things work. It's not saying there are, but there are people out there with skills who find it really hard to get jobs here. So I've got to get the employment side to work as well. So that's the sort of little bit there. I'm going to just click through. I've probably lost it by now. No, let's start with that. And this bit. Am I all right for time, Ken? Okay. These are now, they're slightly random, but I've talked you through that one. This is another berg. I only put that in, and that he and his family all lost at sea. So one of them, he was also in the first photograph. It was George de Berg. He and his family going back from leave from Dublin to England were sunk by a German submarine. So it's all these sort of stories brought up with me. It's General Sir Eric de Berg. That's Chris de Berg's dad. He commanded Hodson's Horse in India. And I get another good gruff first. It's extraordinary. I mean, if you have Chris de Berg's first album, he's in the painting at the back. So to be a little bit kinder on Chris than the comment you made earlier. I was little Danny and I had 3 elder sisters. And Chris came up to stay and he brought his guitar and he charmed my sisters by playing his guitar and singing to them. And I remember thinking, yuck. Pure jealousy. But actually they all know him much better. But the link was more that my mother and his mother were both in Yorkshire during the war, at different sides of the Yorkshire moors, and they would bicycle every now and again and meet each other and have a picnic, and so it built up a much bigger friendship. That's Grandpa's submarine. It was First World War submarine, and I have a photograph of that. And if you imagine there's lines of pistons, so you edged your way down between the pistons, all diesel engines and smells, And one of the diaries I was reading through, he'd gone off to Norway, didn't come back for 5 days. He spent 4 days at the bottom of the sea because the sea was too rough. And they came up just to literally get air and go down again. And Granny's comment was, he did look rather tired. That's just another photograph of them all there. Grandpa's the short one in the middle at the top. There was one time they were all sailing out in formation out of the Firth of Forth at night, and they all follow one light on the ship in front. One of the lights went out, so the ship next door went, oh, there's my light over there, and cut across. Little did they know there was a line of little submarines also in the water, and they cut his submarine in half. He lost 2 men, but he managed to keep it together. And he got a DSO for his work. But I just remember this thing of no such word as can't. You know, that was terrified, and sadly wasn't with us once I was past the age of 10. Sorry, these are in slight odd order. This is a fun inside of the castle picture. This came up at Christie's in someone's collection, and I wanted to buy it because that's the main stairs in the house. Anyway, I bid up to 2,500 and didn't get it. And then the Knight of Glyn, who was also Christie's in Ireland, said, oh, I was bidding for you. We'd be bidding against each other. Anyway, Knighty, bless him, bought them. Many years later, he sold it again, and I got it for 1,100. That's Dad in the 8th Belfast ACAC, a whole gang of them. They all went across to Dunkirk or across to France with the British Expeditionary Force. If you think of your anti-aircraft batteries, that's what ACAC is. You're divided up and put with other regiments. So when they're all told to fall back to Dunkirk, Dad came back through Cherbourg because there's nowhere there. When he was told to blow up his guns, how did you do that? No one had taught you how to blow your own weapons up. So he asked Robin Reed, who was his best man, who lives in Brashane. Robin fought across 14 miles to show Dad how to blow up his weapons. And both came off from Cherbourg. Put this in. This is only Northern Irish regiments could do this. This is them in Burma. This is the 12th of July in Burma. And they made their own archways, they made their own instruments. This is in some of the Orange Halls, so very much part of their life. And half the regiment was Catholic. So they were just lived there, and it's an extraordinary photograph. So this is just me at home. That was my life at home, cutting wood and my dogs, always important. I apologise for being out of it. Lyle and Kinahan, why I lived in a nice big house, because Dad sold it with our share. I got given that by David Shugman. He had it in his house in Belfast when he was a Northern Ireland BBC reporter. That's Dad in the orange. He gave his niece away at a wedding in County Meath in a Catholic chapel. This is in 1973. Got disciplined. Won his disciplinary case because it was the Christian thing to do, and one of the articles was such. And then he left. And what was extraordinary, as a little boy, I grew up in a house where everything was painted orange. Next time I came home from school, it wasn't. My mother was so disgusted. So there's a Lyle and Kinahan tray. I've been collecting all Lyle and Kinahan stuff, and I share it out amongst the family. There's now 24 different little Kinahans here and there. That's the castle as Mum and Dad bought it. So if you look here, whacking great hole in the side, big tower covered in ivy, and this enormous courtyard, beautiful Robert Adam courtyard, but pigsties all the way through it, and I almost needed to show that to you. So that's how Mum and Dad bought it. The walls leaked, but basically it was in pretty good order. But what a playground as a child. We still all right in time? Okay, wave at me. Okay. Okay, well then, William Orr is buried in the graveyard there, and it always intrigues me where Presbyterian Historical Group was there, one of them asking, why is the band, the Sinn Féin band in Antrim, the William Orr Memorial Band? You don't have to explain that the Presbyterians, that version of Republicans, are on the same side in the rebellion. But he's buried in the graveyard there. So you are living someone else's history all the time. So now I'm in my own house. Brought up with peacocks, llamas, lovely, but actually quite nice to go away from them. I'll give you a silly story on a golf. I read that the golf course had stop the geese going on the greens by putting peppercorns around the greens. So I bought a huge thing of peppercorns, went around my mother's garden, my garden, dropping peppercorns around all the flower beds because they used to go in and clean it. Turned around and the peacock was following me, eating them. This is Lord Templeton's signing the covenant at Castle Upton. So it's always been a sort of focus of history. This is the peacocks when I left the door open. The dogs, I told them not to chase the peacocks, so they just watched as they came into the house. And when they crap on something, it's really toxic, and you know not to chase them. But to give you an awful story, Tommy in the yard, in one of the houses my parents had done up, had a sitting room upstairs with lots of beams in it, and he went on holiday and left his door open slightly, came back, all the peacocks were in his top room, in his drawing room, on the beams, crapping on everything. And he got a ladder up and went up the ladder, they all hopped onto the other beam, and then he ran there and they hopped back, and anyway, he wasn't happy, but they're no longer my problem. But this is just an example of living in the castle. Once a year, I'd rent a cherry picker to clean the windows, cut the ivy, fill the holes and do it up. Great fun, except it's quite frightening when you're up on the main tower. There are Lana's mum got 3 deer, some guanacos from the zoo, and so I grew up with, eventually got the herd of deer to 49, then we got TB and had to have them all shot. The guanacos, very good wool, but you can't get near them because they don't like being stroked. So I grew up with them. This is, we opened the place for picnics, because you just believe it when you've got a lovely place like that, share it. And Mum had done the same, so we did this every June for 5 or 6 years. That's it, walking outside. They are winter, and pretty good, other than you had to have the heating all the time on, because otherwise the walls were wringing damp. And I've changed it for that. So that's the new house in the wall garden in the winter, and that's it in the summer. It's actually much bigger than it looks, but I can get the whole family in there. The windows are where I want them, the doors are where I want them, and it's hot, it's warm. I just know there is someone really important in my life, and that's not the North Irish horse, but my wife, Anna. That's the family at Westminster. Very spoiling. All my children were in London when I was there, and so they could always come each week. I could get to see them, whereas poor Anna was left in England. But that was Mia's 21st, which we had in the House of Lords. That's them, much older. That's the gang. None of them married. All, and that was my start in life. You see, I was always going to be a soldier. That's what I really ended up on, was chieftain tanks. Big, horrible, oily, greasy things. That's the smaller one, which I was on. I should have been in the Falklands. We were all doing the training. I was the lead, young troop leader going, and then they said, we don't want tanks. So I went on leave, and then they changed their mind because I was on leave. They sent the other 2, but I did go there 6 months later. That was the only decent photograph I have of me in uniform, and my girlfriend had just given me her umbrella to hold. But anyway, you very rarely wear this. I was much happier in oilier, greasy tanks. But that was wonderful. I was being an usher up on Horse Guards Parade. Much sadder, the Hyde Park bomb. I'd been best man to Anthony Daly 4 weeks before. He was killed with all the horses. So this was me at the back, commanding the funeral in the back. In fact, I couldn't get one word out. I had such a lump in my throat. Then how it all links up. That's the families there many years later when I'm at Westminster. And 2 of the families wanted to take a case, take Downey to court for the bomb. The other 2 wanted to have nothing to do with it. And that about shows the division that I meet with legacy. And I haven't touched on legacy, but that is a huge part of my role. You've got a bill going through Westminster, which is really designed to stop this endless attack on veterans. But it's being looked at as both an amnesty, which it isn't quite, and as going to damage victims. And it bubbles through. The message I get from virtually all veterans is they want a bill that narrows down and only means the worst cases are looked in. And at the same time, I think, you tell me as a society, lots of people just want the past to be moved on. But I have a chunk of veterans who still want prosecution to happen. That's the North Irish Horse badge with a wolf's head. So that I was an honorary colonel of the North Irish Horse a few years ago. Had to help make them survive. They're now part of a Scottish regiment. This is my sort of art world. This was a Lavery painting I was trying to get for years. It eventually sold for Bonhams for £500,000. Really beautiful. And this will be the top end of what I was doing back. So these are now so endless storms. Always had problems with the trees. If you remember the big storm Ophelia, I think we had 18 trees down that time, and that was one of the drives. So plenty of wood, and I've now got a house that doesn't need wood because it's got underfloor heating. But never mind. That's the sister-in-law. I don't know how that ended up in here. And there you are. See, I was really thin in those days. And really, I think that's probably where to end. That's so. Any questions? Any questions on anything? Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. I always feel it's very good to hear of people's life paths and so on and so forth. And I'm sure you've all appreciated what Danny's had to offer today, and a wide experience of life down through his young years. Yeah. So anyway, if you have any questions, quickly and briefly, Danny's happy to answer. If there are any on Zoom, Brendan, nothing on Zoom, right? So if anyone has a quick question about any aspect, anything from Leyland, whatever, happy to take. Or we can say, Stuart, no, right. Okay, Danny, thank you so much. And just in rounding off, our speaker for January is Judith Gillespie, ACC, and she'll be speaking about the Magdalen laundries, etc. And that will be 5th of January. So all in all, that's it. Can I just say a word of thanks to our volunteers? Where would we be in Causeway u3a without our volunteers? And that's a big issue, and a big thank you to all of them. There's no point in talking about someone.
Would you like to say that people can pay for their Christmas lunch?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lonely soul down there in the background, Nigel, and he will take payments both for Christmas lunch and also if you wish to go on the Stormont tour. The details are there. So there you go. Aoife, thank you very much again for your bit and for staying on. And if anyone has any questions or wishes to say hello to anyone, please do so. So there we go. Thanks you all. Safe journey home, or stay for your lunch, whichever. Okay.
Okay, everyone. Well, I think Ken said it all. I'll just say thank you for coming, and also thank you to our technical guys, Brendan, John and William, who do such a terrific job for us. So let's leave them out. Thank you, boys.